Right now, you probably feel busy. You have somewhere to be, something due, a message you haven't answered yet. Your day is carved into blocks, and most of those blocks belong to someone else. But the real answer to how humans actually lived is far stranger than you think. For almost the entire span of human existence, none of this exhausting structure existed at all. No alarm clock, no inbox, no boss, no 9 to 5, and yet people survived. They raised children. They built tools, told stories, fell in love, grew old. So what were they actually doing with their time all day, every day, for hundreds of thousands of years? Was it a constant, brutal scramble for food? A miserable fight against starvation from dawn until dark? The evidence says something almost embarrassing for modern life. Says the opposite. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee traveled to the Kalahari Desert to study the Jew/Hoansi people, a hunter-gatherer group in what is now Namibia and Botswana. He expected to find people locked in a desperate daily struggle. Instead, he found something that didn't fit the story at all. Adults worked, on average, around 15 hours a week to meet their basic needs. 15 hours. Not 50. Not 60. 15. The rest of their time went to rest, to socializing, to storytelling, to naps in the shade. Children weren't shuffled off to structured programs. Elders weren't sidelined. Everyone was simply there, moving through the day together. This wasn't a fluke. It wasn't one lucky tribe in one lucky decade. When the anthropologist Marshall Sahlins gathered data like this from multiple hunter-gatherer societies around the world, he coined a phrase that still unsettles people who hear it for the first time. He called them the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff. Affluent because they wanted less, and what they wanted they usually already had. Think about that for a second. Wealth in our world means accumulation. More money, more possessions, more square footage. But Sahlins was pointing at a different kind of wealth entirely. The wealth of low expectations, matched almost perfectly to what the environment could provide. If your needs are small and the world around you can meet them without a struggle, you are, in a very real sense, rich. Even if you own almost nothing. So if ancient humans weren't spending their days in constant hunger and labor, what filled the hours? Gathering came first, and it wasn't punishing work. Groups moved through familiar territory collecting roots, nuts, berries, and tubers, work that was steady but not frantic, often done in the company of others, with plenty of pausing to talk. Hunting was more sporadic. A big kill might feed a group for days, which meant the days right after a successful hunt required almost no labor at all. Then there was everything else. Toolmaking. Not as a chore, but sometimes almost as a craft, shaping stone or wood with real care and, likely, real satisfaction. Teaching children not in classrooms but by simply letting them tag along, watch, and try. Long conversations around a fire that, according to research by the anthropologist Polly Wiesner, who studied the Jew/Hoansi decades after Lee's original fieldwork, made up a huge portion of evening life. Wiesner found that daytime talk tended to focus on practical matters and minor complaints, but nighttime talk, the fireside talk, turned toward stories, myths, distant relatives, jokes, the kind of talk that builds a shared world. That fire wasn't just for warmth. It was where culture got made. Here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. Leisure wasn't the reward waiting at the end of ancient life. It was the baseline. Long stretches of unstructured time weren't rare treats squeezed in around survival. They were the default condition of being human for the vast majority of our history. The 5-day, 40-hour workweek you might sigh about isn't ancient wisdom passed down through the ages. It's an extremely recent invention. So what changed? Agriculture changed it. Around 10 to 12,000 years ago, in different pockets of the world, humans began farming. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because farming didn't necessarily make life easier. In many cases, it made it harder. Fields need constant tending. Crops fail. Storing surplus food creates something brand new in human history. Things worth stealing, and therefore things worth guarding. The anthropologist James Sussman, who has spent decades studying both hunter-gatherer societies and the deep history of human labor, has argued that agriculture is really the moment work, in the modern sense, was born. Not because farming required more raw effort every single day than foraging did, but because it created scarcity where there hadn't been much before. It created ownership. It created the very real possibility of having nothing, while someone else nearby had plenty. Once that possibility existed, everything changed. People began working not just to meet their needs for today, but to guard against tomorrow, to build a surplus, to protect land, tools, and stored grain from those who might take them. Hierarchies formed. Some people began directing the labor of others. And slowly, across thousands of years, the 15-hour week of the Kalahari gave way to something else entirely. You can trace a fairly straight line from those first grain stores to the factory floor, and from the factory floor to the office you may be sitting in right now. Which brings us to something worth sitting with. The tiredness you feel isn't a permanent feature of being human. It's the result of a specific set of choices, made over thousands of years, about how to organize food, land, and time. Your ancestors weren't lazy for resting so much. They weren't primitive for having so much unstructured time. If anything, by Sahlins' own definition, they may have been living a kind of wealth that most modern humans have quietly lost access to. None of this means farming was a mistake, or that modern life is some kind of trap you need to escape. Agriculture eventually allowed for cities, medicine, writing, everything that makes this very video possible. But it's worth knowing what was actually traded away to get here. Time. Slack. The kind of afternoon where nothing in particular needs to happen. There's a reason this history rarely makes it into how we talk about work today. We tend to assume that constant labor is simply the human condition, that struggle is natural and rest must be earned. The Jew/hoansi, and dozens of other hunter-gatherer societies studied since Lee's fieldwork, suggest otherwise. They suggest that for the majority of the time humans have existed on this planet, a full life required far less grinding than we assume, and far more sitting, talking, and simply being present with other people. So the next time your calendar feels impossibly full, it might be worth remembering that this feeling is new. Not universal. Not eternal. New. Tonight, when you finally get a moment to yourself, when the messages stop and the to-do list gets set aside, you're doing something that would have felt completely unremarkable to almost every human who ever lived before you. You're just sitting, existing, present with nothing urgent to do. For most of human history, that wasn't the exception. It was simply the day.